It was a regular, bustling morning at Grantwood High School, a large campus nestled in a suburban neighborhood known for its impressive academic reputation. The bell had just rung, signaling the end of first period, and the halls filled with students chatting, laughing, and shuffling to their next classes. Among them was Tamara Johnson, a bright, driven black teenager known for her academic excellence and dedication to extracurriculars. She was the kind of student who teachers admired and her peers respected, ambitious, focused, and, by all accounts, a model of success for someone her age. Tamara waited by her locker, rearranging the books in her bag with quick, efficient motions. She was deep in thought, mentally preparing herself for a quiz she had in her next class. Her mind was a flurry of equations and definitions when she suddenly noticed a shift in the atmosphere around her. The casual flow of students in the hallway seemed to slow, and a tense silence followed as eyes discreetly turned in her direction. Tamara glanced up, her gaze meeting that of Officer Kelly Roberts. Officer Roberts, a new addition to the school's security team, was a tall, broad-shouldered white woman in her 40s, known for her unyielding approach to discipline. She had a reputation around the school for her strict, almost militaristic demeanor, and it was clear to many that she preferred the more orderly students. This was her first assignment as a school security officer, and she wore her uniform and badge with an air of superiority that made students uncomfortable. Beneath her controlled exterior, however, lurked a deeply ingrained bias, a subtle but clear contempt for students who, in her eyes, didn't belong in a prestigious school like Grantwood High. Today, for whatever reason, Tamara had caught her attention. Officer Roberts had been watching her from across the hall, her sharp gaze fixated on the teen as though she was studying a suspect in a lineup. Tamara felt the scrutiny, an icy sensation prickling along her skin as she registered the look of suspicion in Roberts's eyes. She straightened her back, trying to appear calm and focused, but her heart beat faster. She'd experienced this kind of attention before, the kind that made her feel like she was under a microscope, every movement analyzed and dissected. "Hey you," Roberts called out, her voice loud and cutting through the din of the hallway. Several students stopped mid-conversation, glancing over curiously as Tamara looked up, surprised. Roberts approached her with slow, deliberate steps, her eyes narrowed and her hand resting firmly on her belt, as though she were ready to spring into action at the slightest provocation. "Yes, Officer Roberts," Tamara responded, her tone polite but cautious. She'd learned over the years to stay composed in situations like this, to avoid showing any reaction that might be misinterpreted as aggression or defiance. "What are you doing hanging around here?" Roberts demanded, her gaze flicking over Tamara's school bag, as though she expected to see something suspicious peeking out from between the textbooks and notebooks. "Shouldn't you be in class?" Tamara was taken aback by the accusatory tone. She hesitated, wondering if she had unknowingly done something wrong. "I'm heading to my next class, Ma'am," she replied carefully, holding up her schedule as proof. "Just grabbing my books." Roberts scoffed, her gaze hardening. "You look like you're loitering, not getting to class. And what's with all the stuff in that bag? Seems like you're carrying more than school supplies." Tamara's heart sank. She knew where this was going. She'd seen it happen before to other students, particularly those who looked like her. She felt the humiliation starting to creep in, but she kept her face neutral. "It's just my books and some personal items, officer. I can show you if you'd like," she offered, trying to keep her tone steady and non-confrontational. But her calmness only seemed to provoke Roberts further. "Open the bag," Roberts demanded, her voice firm and unyielding, drawing the attention of more students who lingered nearby, curious and apprehensive. Tamara took a deep breath and unzipped her bag, revealing neatly arranged textbooks, a pencil case, her lunch, and a small journal where she kept personal notes and reminders. There was nothing remotely suspicious inside, but the look of disdain in Roberts's eyes didn't soften. If anything, it seemed to deepen, as though she found offense in Tamara's very presence. "Him!" Roberts murmured, her hand still resting on her belt as she looked at Tamara with a skeptical frown. "You know, I've seen your type before," she muttered, loud enough for Tamara and a few of the nearby students to hear. "Thinking you can just stroll around as if you own the place. Thinking the rules don't apply to you." Tamara's face flushed with anger and shame, but she bit back a retort, reminding herself to stay calm. She'd learned the hard way that any sign of defiance, any hint of irritation, could be used against her. She met Roberts's gaze unflinching, but kept her expression respectful. "Officer Roberts, I haven't done anything wrong," she said softly, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of hurt. "I'm just trying to get to class." "Save it," Roberts snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. "You can play innocent all you want, but I know what I'm seeing." She paused, looking Tamara up and down with an expression that sent a chill down the girl's spine. "People like you always think you're so clever, hiding things, thinking you're above the rules." Tamara felt her hands tremble slightly as she held her bag close to her chest. She didn't understand why Roberts had singled her out, but the officer's words were like a slap in the face, a stark reminder that, in the eyes of some, she would never be just another student. She would always be judged more harshly, always be presumed guilty until proven otherwise. As Roberts continued her scrutiny, Tamara couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. She glanced around, noticing the uncomfortable expressions on her classmates' faces. A few of them looked away, avoiding her gaze, as though they feared that any sign of empathy might draw Roberts's ire to them next. "I think it's best if you come with me," Roberts finally said, her voice cold and authoritative. "I'm going to take a closer look at what you've got there. And if there's anything you're hiding, it's better for you to come clean now." Tamara's pulse quickened. She hadn't expected this situation to escalate so quickly, but it was clear that Roberts wasn't interested in letting her go. I don't have anything to hide," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Then you won't mind a little extra scrutiny," Roberts replied with a smirk, taking Tamara by the arm and guiding her down the hallway toward the security office. Tamara's heart pounded, her mind racing with anxiety and anger. She felt humiliated, stripped of her dignity in front of her peers, and the sting of it left a bitter taste in her mouth. As they walked, Tamara tried to keep her composure, but she could feel her self-control slipping. She wanted to fight back, to defend herself, to shout that this was unfair, that she hadn't done anything wrong. But she knew that any show of defiance would only make things worse. In her mind, she thought of her Aunt Lauren, a federal agent who had always taught her to stand up for herself, to know her rights, and to be proud of who she was. Lauren had faced discrimination too, but she had always told Tamara to remain strong, to fight back not with anger, but with dignity and resilience. Tamara clung to those memories now, letting them steady her as she prepared herself for whatever came next. As Tamara was led down the hallway toward the security office, her mind raced, heart pounding with a mixture of anger and helplessness. Officer Roberts' grip on her arm was firm, almost bruising, a stark reminder of the power imbalance between them. Tamara kept her face composed, holding on to the last bit of her dignity as other students looked on, their expressions a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and a few poorly hidden smirks from those who enjoyed seeing someone else in trouble. They finally reached the security office, a small, dimly lit room filled with filing cabinets, a metal desk cluttered with paperwork, and a few uncomfortable-looking plastic chairs. The fluorescent light flickered slightly, casting a cold, unforgiving glow over everything. Roberts gestured for Tamara to sit, but Tamara remained standing, her defiance subtly visible in the way she held herself. Roberts narrowed her eyes, annoyed by the girl's silent resistance. "Sit," Roberts barked, her tone sharp and unyielding. Tamara reluctantly complied, sinking into the rigid chair, her back straight and her gaze focused ahead. She wasn't about to let Roberts intimidate her, even though every nerve in her body was screaming in protest. Roberts took a seat across from her, crossing her arms as she leaned back, studying Tamara with a look that was equal parts suspicion and disdain. For a few moments there was only silence, an oppressive, suffocating silence that seemed to amplify every sound in the room, the hum of the air conditioning, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant sounds of students moving through the halls. Tamara felt the weight of Robert's gaze on her, scrutinizing her as though she were a criminal. "Let's get one thing straight," Roberts finally said, her voice low and laced with barely concealed hostility. "I don't buy your innocent act for 1 second. I know what you're trying to pull." Tamara blinked, taken aback by the blatant accusation. "I'm not trying to pull anything," she replied, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I was just going to class, officer." Roberts scoffed, a humorless smile twisting her lips. "Going to class," she repeated mockingly, as though the idea were laughable. "You think I haven't seen this before? A student like you, acting like you're above the rules, thinking you can just walk around, do whatever you want, and no one's going to notice." Tamara felt a surge of indignation rise within her, but she forced herself to stay composed. She had learned long ago that any hint of emotion would be used against her, twisted to fit whatever narrative Roberts was constructing in her mind. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Tamara insisted quietly, though her voice betrayed a hint of the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Roberts leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she continued her interrogation. "You really expect me to believe that? You don't look like the kind of student who belongs here, and from the way you're acting, I'm willing to bet you've got something to hide." She glanced pointedly at Tamara's bag, which was resting on her lap, as though it contained some kind of contraband or hidden evidence of wrongdoing. Tamara gripped her bag tightly, a mix of fear and anger boiling in her chest. She knew she had nothing to hide, yet the way Roberts was looking at her made her feel exposed, vulnerable, as if every detail of her life were being put under a harsh spotlight. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of her aunt's advice: "Stay calm, don't let them see you sweat." "Would you like to check my bag again?" Tamara asked, her voice steady, though there was a slight edge to it. "I have nothing to hide." "Oh, I'm going to check your bag again," Roberts sneered, snatching the bag from her lap before Tamara could protest. She dumped the contents onto the desk, scattering Tamara's books, pens and personal items across the surface with a dismissive flick of her wrist. A journal tumbled out, its pages flipping open to a private entry Tamara had written the week before, but Roberts barely glanced at it, her focus solely on finding something incriminating. The officer sifted through the items with a look of intense concentration, as if determined to find anything that would validate her suspicions. When she came up empty-handed, her frustration was palpable, her jaw clenching as she glared at Tamara, as though blaming her for the lack of evidence. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Roberts muttered, her voice dripping with contempt. "Walking around here like you own the place, pretending to be a model student. But I see right through you." Tamara couldn't hold back any longer. "Pretending?" she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "I'm not pretending anything. I work hard, I follow the rules, and I've never caused any trouble. Why are you treating me like I'm a criminal?" The question hung in the air, challenging and raw. For a moment, Roberts was silent, her expression hardening as she absorbed Tamara's words. Then, as if Tamara's defiance had triggered something in her, Roberts leaned in close, her face inches from Tamara's, her tone laced with venom. "Because I know your type," she hissed. "You think just because you're in some fancy school you can walk around with your head held high like you're better than everyone else. But you're not. You're just another kid who doesn't know her place." Tamara's heart raced, a mixture of fear and fury swirling within her. She wanted to scream, to shout that this wasn't fair, that she didn't deserve this, but she knew it would only make things worse. She forced herself to take a deep breath, clinging to the remnants of her composure. "I think I'd like to speak with someone else," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Maybe the principal, or—" "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" Roberts interrupted, her tone harsh and mocking. "I'm the one in charge here, and you're going to do as you're told. Understand?" Tamara bit her lip, holding back the retort that was on the tip of her tongue. She knew Roberts wanted a reaction, something she could use as an excuse to escalate the situation further. Tamara could feel the weight of her anger pressing down on her, but she forced herself to remain silent, refusing to give Roberts the satisfaction. Just then, one of Tamara's belongings caught Roberts' eye, a small, inconspicuous badge tucked inside a clear pocket in the journal's front cover. It was a badge given to her by her aunt, a token from her position in the FBI. Tamara kept it close as a reminder of her aunt's strength and resilience, but she'd never thought it would attract attention. Roberts picked up the journal, flipping it open to reveal the badge. She frowned, inspecting it closely, her expression shifting from suspicion to derision. "And what's this?" she sneered, holding it up for Tamara to see. "You think you're in the FBI now, too? Playing pretend. Or did you steal this from someone?" Tamara's eyes widened, a surge of panic bubbling up inside her. "No, that's from my aunt." "She's actually in the FBI," she explained quickly, her voice almost pleading. "She gave it to me." But Roberts wasn't listening. She chuckled, shaking her head in disbelief. "Your aunt? In the FBI? That's rich. You expect me to believe that? You're just full of surprises, aren't you?" She tossed the badge back onto the desk, her contemptuous smirk never wavering. "Nice try, but I'm not falling for it." Tamara felt a wave of frustration and helplessness wash over her. She knew Roberts wouldn't believe her, wouldn't even entertain the possibility that she was telling the truth. In Roberts' eyes, Tamara was guilty by default, no matter what she said or did. But then, a spark of defiance flared within her. She met Roberts' gaze, her own eyes flashing with a newfound resolve. "Call her," she said quietly. "If you really think I'm lying, call my aunt. I'm sure she'd love to talk to you." The challenge in her voice hung in the air, a quiet but powerful act of rebellion. For the first time, Roberts hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. She hadn't expected Tamara to push back, hadn't expected her to hold her ground so firmly. But Roberts quickly masked her hesitation, her expression hardening once more. "Oh, I will," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "And we'll see how far your little story holds up." As Tamara sat in the small, oppressive security office, her gaze never wavered from Officer Roberts. She felt a strange mixture of fear and defiance, fear of what this woman could do to her reputation, her future, or even her safety, and defiance fueled by the unfairness and humiliation of it all. In her mind, she clung to memories of her Aunt Lauren's advice. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are. Stand tall, even if you're shaking inside. Roberts, however, seemed determined to break her spirit. After dismissing Tamara's badge as a cheap fake, she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms as she continued to scrutinize the teenager with a look of unmasked disdain. "Let me tell you something," Roberts began, her voice dripping with condescension. "I don't care who you claim your aunt is. I've seen all kinds of excuses from kids like you. I've heard every story in the book. You think you can just throw some fancy title at me and I'll back down? Think again." Tamara clenched her fists, struggling to maintain her composure. She wanted to scream, to demand why this woman was treating her with such contempt when she hadn't done anything wrong. But instead, she sat there, silently enduring Robert's taunts, knowing that any outburst would only serve as more ammunition for the officer. Robert seemed to take Tamara's silence as a sign of guilt. "Nothing to say now, huh?" she sneered. "I thought so. You're all talk until someone with real authority steps in. Well, let me make something clear. I'm the authority here. Not your so-called FBI aunt, not your teachers, not anyone else. Me. And you better learn to respect that." Tamara couldn't hold back any longer. She looked up, meeting Robert's cold, unyielding gaze. "Respect is earned," she said quietly, her voice trembling with both fear and anger. "And I don't respect people who treat others like this for no reason." For a moment, Roberts looked taken aback, her expression twisting with surprise and then fury. The defiance in Tamara's words seemed to have struck a nerve. Robert's face reddened slightly, and her jaw clenched as she fought to regain control of the situation. She took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. "You think you're smart, don't you?" she hissed. "You think you can talk back to me and get away with it? Well, let's see how smart you feel when I call the police down here and tell them we've got a student refusing to cooperate. Let's see how your little attitude holds up then." Tamara's heart skipped a beat. The idea of the police coming, of this situation spiraling further out of control, sent a chill through her. She knew that, as unfair as this all was, any resistance could be turned against her. The threat of calling the police was real, and it was designed to frighten her into submission. "Is that what you want?" Roberts continued, her tone sharp and menacing. "Because I have no problem making that call. I've dealt with far worse than you. So why don't you drop the act, hand over any contraband you're hiding, and save us both some time?" Tamara's eyes filled with frustration and hurt, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I told you I don't have anything to hide," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of exhaustion. "You've already gone through my things. There's nothing there." Robert shook her head, letting out a low, bitter laugh. "You really think I'm just going to take your word for it? I don't trust you. I see right through your little innocent act." She stood up abruptly, walking around the desk to stand beside Tamara, looming over her with a look of disdain. "Stand up," she ordered. Tamara hesitated, looking up at her with wide, wary eyes. "Why?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because I said so," Robert snapped. "And I'm going to do a full search, just to make sure you're not hiding anything." Her tone was cold, final, leaving no room for argument. A wave of humiliation washed over Tamara. She could feel the blood draining from her face as she realized what Roberts intended to do. The idea of being searched like a criminal, right here in the security office, was almost more than she could bear. But she knew she had no choice. Any protest would be seen as further proof of guilt. Slowly, reluctantly, Tamara rose to her feet, holding her arms out as Roberts patted her down with brisk, impersonal efficiency. The officer's hands were rough, unkind, as though she were determined to make Tamara feel every ounce of her power and authority. Tamara clenched her teeth, forcing herself to remain still, but inside, she was burning with a mix of shame, anger, and helplessness. When the search was over and Roberts found nothing, she stepped back with an irritated scowl. "Fine," she muttered, clearly disappointed by her lack of success, "but don't think this means you're off the hook. I know there's something you're hiding, and I will find it." Tamara's voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke. "I've told you the truth. I don't know why you won't believe me." Roberts ignored her, glancing down at Tamara's open journal on the desk. She picked it up, flipping through the pages with an air of smug curiosity. "What's this, then?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "A diary? Keeping little secrets, are we?" Tamara felt a pang of dread as Roberts rifled through the private entries, reading passages aloud in a mocking tone. "Oh, look. Here's something interesting. Stay focused, don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough. How cute. Did you write this to give yourself a pep talk?" A surge of anger flared within Tamara. Her journal was deeply personal, a place where she recorded her thoughts, fears, and dreams. Roberts had no right to invade her privacy like this. "Please," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Please don't read that." "It's private." Roberts smirked, ignoring her plea as she continued to skim through the pages. "Private? You lost the right to privacy the moment you decided to act like a little troublemaker." She looked up, her eyes glinting with a sadistic satisfaction. "You want to know the real reason I don't believe you? It's because I've seen your kind before. Thinking you can just waltz into places where you don't belong, demanding respect you haven't earned. Well, guess what? Respect isn't something you're entitled to. It's something you earn. And you? You haven't earned a thing." Tamara's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms as she struggled to hold back her tears. She wanted to defend herself, to shout that she had earned her place at this school, that she had worked harder than most to get where she was. But she knew it would be pointless. Roberts wasn't interested in the truth. She had already made up her mind, and nothing Tamara said would change that. Just then, the door to the security office opened, and the assistant principal, Mr. Graham, stepped inside. He looked between Tamara and Roberts, his brow furrowing as he took in the tense atmosphere. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice filled with concern as he glanced at Tamara, noticing the distress on her face. Roberts straightened up, adopting a tone of forced politeness. "Everything's fine, Mr. Graham. I was just having a little chat with Ms. Johnson here. She was acting suspiciously in the hallway, and I wanted to make sure there was nothing inappropriate going on." Mr. Graham's expression grew more serious as he turned his attention to Tamara, noting her discomfort and the scum way she was clutching her bag. "Ms. Johnson is one of our top students," he said carefully, his gaze shifting to Roberts with a hint of disapproval. "I'm sure if she says she wasn't doing anything wrong, we can take her at her word." Roberts bristled at the implication, her jaw tightening as she forced a smile. "With all due respect, Mr. Graham, I'm simply doing my job. I have to ensure the safety and order of this school, and sometimes that means making tough calls." Mr. Graham crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "Tough calls are one thing, Officer Roberts, but we must also be fair and treat our students with respect. Ms. Johnson is an exemplary student, and I trust her judgment. I'm not sure that treating her like a criminal is the best way to handle things." Robert's face flushed with barely concealed anger, but she held her tongue, clearly realizing that arguing with Mr. Graham would not end well. She forced another smile, though her eyes flashed with resentment. "Of course, sir. I apologize if I've overstepped." Tamara felt a rush of relief as Mr. Graham turned to her, his tone softening. "Ez Johnson, you're free to go. I apologize for any misunderstanding." But as she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Robert's voice stopped her cold. "Not so fast," she said, her tone sharper than ever. "I still need to verify some things with Ms. Johnson's family. She mentioned an aunt in the FBI, and I'd like to confirm that before I'm satisfied." Mr. Graham raised an eyebrow, looking between Roberts and Tamara with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Is that really necessary, Officer Roberts? I don't think this situation warrants." "I believe it is necessary, Mr. Graham," Roberts interrupted, her tone resolute. "If Ms. Johnson's story checks out, she has nothing to worry about." Tamara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew her aunt, Lauren, wouldn't take kindly to being dragged into this, but a part of her felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps her aunt's involvement was exactly what she needed to put an end to this nightmare. "Fine," Tamara said, her voice steady. "Call her. She'll tell you the truth." Robert's eyes gleamed with a twisted satisfaction as she reached for the phone. She dialed the number Tamara provided, her expression a mix of smugness and anticipation. As the phone rang, the room fell into an uneasy silence, each ring heightening the tension. After a few moments, the call connected, and a calm, authoritative voice answered on the other end. "This is Agent Lauren Walker of the FBI. Who am I speaking with?" Robert's confident smirk faltered slightly as she introduced herself, her voice losing some of its earlier arrogance. "Yes, this is Officer Kelly Roberts from Grantwood High School. I'm calling about your niece, Tamara Johnson." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and though Tamara couldn't hear her aunt's response, she could imagine the steely look in Lauren's eyes as she took in the situation. "Is there a problem, Officer Roberts?" Lauren's voice was polite, but Tamara could detect an undercurrent of barely restrained anger. Roberts hesitated, suddenly less sure of herself. She cleared her throat, her tone faltering. "Well, there was a situation and I felt it necessary to verify some information. You understand, of course, that school security is my priority." "I understand that protecting my niece from unwarranted harassment is my priority," Lauren replied, her tone now icy. "Now, please explain to me exactly what kind of situation required you to treat my niece like a criminal." The tension in the room was palpable as Officer Roberts clutched the phone, her face visibly pale as she listened to Agent Lauren Walker's icy voice on the other end. Tamara, still clutching her bag, felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her aunt's presence, even through the phone, seemed to fill the room with an unspoken authority that cut through Roberts' facade. "Officer Roberts," Lauren continued, her tone calm but laced with a steely edge that left no room for argument, "I am struggling to understand how a routine school day led to you detaining and interrogating my niece as though she were a criminal. This seems highly irregular, wouldn't you agree?" Roberts cleared her throat, a faint sheen of sweat now visible on her forehead. She fumbled with her words, her usual confidence wavering. "Agent Walker, I was simply doing my duty. You understand, of course, that in my position, I have to ensure the safety and integrity of this school. Tamara was acting suspiciously, and given the current climate, I felt it necessary to investigate." Suspiciously. Lauren's voice was ice cold, each syllable measured and precise. "Tamara is an honor student. She has no record of any behavioral issues, no history of violence, and no reason to be deemed a threat. So, Officer Roberts, I'd like to know exactly what suspicious behavior prompted you to single her out. I'm very interested in hearing the details." Roberts squirmed, casting a quick glance at Mr. Graham, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. She was clearly struggling to find a response that would justify her actions without further incriminating herself. She was loitering in the hallway, and her demeanor was defiant. She didn't appear to be where she was supposed to be. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Tamara could almost picture her aunt pinching the bridge of her nose in restrained frustration. "Officer Roberts, are you honestly telling me that you detained my niece because she was standing in a hallway and looked at you wrong?" The way Lauren phrased it made the accusation sound absurd, and Tamara saw Mr. Graham's lips tighten, suppressing a look of disapproval. Roberts, however, was too entrenched in her need to defend her authority to back down now. "With all due respect, Agent Walker, I don't think you understand the dynamics here," Roberts said, attempting to regain her composure. "We have a duty to prevent disruptions, and sometimes that means making tough calls. I know you may feel protective over your niece, but—" Lauren's voice cut through Roberts' words like a blade. "You're right, Officer Roberts. I am protective over my niece, because I know how easily people in positions of authority can abuse their power when they assume they're above accountability." There was a weighted silence, and Tamara felt a surge of pride and validation at hearing her aunt so firmly take her side. She had been holding her breath, terrified that her aunt might assume she'd done something wrong, that perhaps there was some misunderstanding. But Lauren's unwavering support grounded her, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Robert's voice softened, betraying a flicker of desperation. "Look, I'm just doing my job, Agent Walker. I didn't mean for this to escalate." "Oh, but it has escalated," Lauren responded, her voice now carrying a note of finality. "You've taken a personal grudge against my niece and turned it into a misuse of power. You have treated an innocent student with hostility, dismissed her rights, and are now grasping at straws to justify your actions. So here's what's going to happen, Officer Roberts. You're going to let Tamara leave this room immediately, and we are going to have a conversation with the school administration about this incident." Roberts' face was flushed, her jaw clenched as she struggled to maintain any semblance of control over the situation. It was clear that she had not anticipated such resistance, much less from a federal agent with the authority and confidence to challenge her. "I don't think that's necessary," she muttered, her tone defensive. Mr. Graham, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke up. "Actually, Officer Roberts, I believe it is necessary," he said, his voice firm but polite. "Given the nature of this situation and the concerns raised by Agent Walker, I think we should involve the administration and ensure that this matter is handled appropriately." Tamara watched as Robert's expression shifted from irritation to something closer to panic. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but Mr. Graham's steady gaze seemed to cut her off before she could speak. His quiet authority, combined with Lauren's presence on the phone, left her cornered, unable to escape the consequences of her actions. "Very well," Roberts finally conceded, her voice tight with barely restrained anger. She shot Tamara a glare, as if blaming her for the entire ordeal. "But I stand by my assessment. I was simply following protocol." Lauren's voice, calm and controlled, came through the speaker again. "I'll be at the school shortly to discuss this in person. I suggest you prepare yourself, Officer Roberts, because this conversation isn't over." The line went dead, and for a brief moment, silence filled the room. Tamara could feel the weight of the tension, the simmering resentment in Robert's gaze, and the quiet relief in Mr. Graham's posture. She felt as though she had been holding her breath for hours, and only now could she finally exhale. Mr. Graham turned to Tamara, his expression softening. "Tamara, I'm sorry you had to go through this. You're free to go back to class. I'll make sure you're excused for any time missed." Tamara managed a small nod, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Graham." She gathered her belongings, feeling a mix of exhaustion and gratitude that someone in the school was willing to stand up for her. As she moved to leave the room, Robert's voice stopped her once again, filled with bitterness. "This isn't over, young lady. You might think you can get away with this because of your connections, but you're not fooling anyone." Tamara turned back to look at her, meeting her gaze head-on. She felt a new surge of confidence, a strength she hadn't felt when she first entered the room. Her aunt's words, her unwavering support, had reignited something within her, a quiet, resolute fire. "With all due respect, Officer Roberts," Tamara said, her voice steady and calm, "I don't need to fool anyone. I just need people to see the truth." And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Robert seething in silence. As Tamara made her way down the hall, her heart was still racing, but now it beat with a mixture of relief and determination. She knew this incident wasn't just a one-time ordeal. It was part of a larger issue, a painful reminder that, no matter how hard she worked or how well she behaved, some people would always see her as less. But her aunt had taught her to confront the reality with courage, to stand her ground, and to demand respect, even when others refused to give it. When she reached her next class, she slipped into her seat quietly, her classmates glancing at her with curious, concerned expressions. She offered a small, reassuring smile, as if to say, "I'm okay," though she knew she was far from okay. The rest of the school day passed in a blur, her mind replaying the events in the security office, her aunt's unwavering defense, and the bitter look on Robert's face. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she'd encounter prejudice, and it likely wouldn't be the last time someone like Roberts would try to use their power against her. As the final bell rang, Tamara made her way to the front office, where her aunt was waiting for her. Lauren stood tall, her presence radiating confidence and authority, yet her face softened when she saw Tamara approach. "Hey, sweetheart," Lauren said gently, pulling her into a warm embrace. Tamara felt herself relax, finally able to let down her guard. "Thank you, Aunt Lauren," Tamara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Lauren pulled back, looking into Tamara's eyes with a fierce protectiveness. "You don't have to thank me. Standing up for you is the least I could do. No one has the right to treat you that way, not at school, not anywhere." Tamara nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude and admiration for her aunt. I don't understand why she did it. I didn't do anything wrong." Lauren sighed, her expression turning somber. Sometimes people in positions of authority forget what their job really is. They get so caught up in their own biases and assumptions that they stop seeing people as individuals. They see them as stereotypes, as problems they need to solve. "But I'm not a problem," Tamara murmured, more to herself than to her aunt. "No, you're not," Lauren agreed firmly. "And don't you ever let anyone make you feel like you are. People like Officer Roberts, they'll always be there, trying to tear you down. But you have to remember that you're strong, and you're worthy of respect. You keep standing up for yourself, Tamara. Don't let them take away your pride." Tamara took a deep breath, nodding as she absorbed her aunt's words. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but with Lauren by her side, she felt more capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. This experience had left her shaken, but it had also reminded her of her own resilience, her ability to rise above the cruelty and prejudice of others. "Come on," Lauren said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Let's go home. We've had enough of school politics for one day." As they walked out of the school together, Tamara felt a sense of closure, knowing that she had stood up for herself, that she had family who would always have her back, and that she had the strength to face whatever came next. She wasn't just another student, another face in the crowd. She was Tamara Johnson, resilient, determined, and, most importantly, unbreakable. The ride home was quiet. Tamara sat in the passenger seat of her aunt's car, staring out the window as they drove through the familiar streets, her mind still spinning from the events at school. Lauren glanced over at her every so often, her expression a mixture of concern and restrained anger. She could tell that her aunt was still processing the encounter with Officer Roberts, replaying it in her mind and likely contemplating the best course of action. When they reached Tamara's house, Lauren parked the car but made no move to get out. Instead, she turned toward Tamara, her gaze steady and reassuring. "Tamara, I need you to understand something," Lauren began, her tone gentle but firm. "What happened today wasn't just about you. It was about a larger problem, one that people like Officer Roberts represent. This won't be the last time you encounter someone who sees you as a stereotype instead of a person. But you need to remember who you are and where you come from. You're stronger than their ignorance." Tamara nodded, her throat tight. She'd always admired her aunt's resilience, her ability to face prejudice and injustice with unshakable confidence. But as she replayed the events of the day, she felt a lingering sense of humiliation, a wound that words alone couldn't easily heal. Lauren placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. "If you ever feel like you're losing that strength, you come to me. You're not alone in this. I'll always be here for you, and I'll fight for you whenever you need it." Tamara managed a small smile, grateful for her aunt's support. She took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. "Thank you, Aunt Lauren. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there today." Lauren gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You would have found a way. I know you, Tamara. You have more strength than you realize." She hesitated, her expression darkening slightly. "But we're not done with this yet. I've already contacted the school administration. Officer Roberts crossed a line, and there need to be consequences." Tamara felt a surge of apprehension. "Do you think they'll actually do anything about it?" Lauren's gaze hardened. "They will if they want to avoid a public scandal. And if they try to brush this under the rug, I'll make sure it gets the attention it deserves." Her tone was resolute, her eyes steely with determination. Tamara knew that her aunt was not someone who made empty threats. The following morning, Tamara walked into school with her head held high, her aunt's words of encouragement echoing in her mind. She knew the day wouldn't be easy. Rumors had already started to spread about the incident, and she could feel the weight of curious, judgmental stares from her classmates as she moved through the halls. But Tamara refused to let it get to her. She focused on her classes, determined to reclaim her sense of normalcy. She wanted to show everyone, especially Officer Roberts, who was likely lurking somewhere on campus, that she wouldn't be broken by their prejudice. During her lunch break, Tamara sat alone in the cafeteria, scrolling through her phone when she saw an email notification from the school administration. The subject line made her heart skip a beat. Follow-up meeting regarding incident with Officer Roberts. Tamara's pulse quickened as she read the message. The principal wanted to meet with her and her aunt in his office after school. The email was brief and formal, but it was clear that they intended to address the situation in a more official capacity. She felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. This was a step toward accountability, but she knew the road ahead would be fraught with tension. The school day passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. When the final bell rang, Tamara gathered her things and headed to the principal's office, where Lauren was already waiting for her. She looked poised and confident, a stark contrast to the apprehensive expression on Tamara's face. "You ready for this?" Lauren asked, her tone calm but reassuring. Tamara nodded, steeling herself. "Yeah, I'm ready." They entered the principal's office together, Where Principal Daniels was waiting, his expression a mixture of professionalism and concern. Beside him sat Officer Roberts, her face tight with barely concealed irritation. She avoided making eye contact with either of them, her jaw clenched as she stared at the floor. "Thank you both for coming," Principal Daniels began, gesturing for them to take a seat. "I wanted to have this meeting to discuss the incident that occurred yesterday. It's important to me that we address this situation thoroughly and ensure that all parties are treated fairly." Lauren's gaze was unwavering as she looked at the principal. "Principal Daniels, with all due respect, what happened yesterday was a blatant misuse of authority. My niece was humiliated and treated like a criminal, despite having done nothing wrong. I'm here to make sure that this doesn't happen again to her or to any other student." Principal Daniels shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. "I understand your concerns, Agent Walker, and I want to assure you that we take this matter very seriously. Officer Roberts has provided her account of the events, and while we acknowledge that there may have been misunderstandings, I believe it's important that we find a resolution that respects everyone's perspectives." "Misunderstandings," Lauren repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of racial profiling and harassment. Officer Roberts treated Tamara with suspicion solely because of her appearance, without any legitimate cause." At this, Roberts finally looked up, her eyes flashing with indignation. "With all due respect, Agent Walker, I was simply doing my job. I'm responsible for maintaining security on this campus, and sometimes that means making tough calls. Tamara was acting suspiciously, and I followed protocol." Lauren's expression remained calm, but there was an edge to her tone. "Protocol? Since when does protocol involve detaining a student for standing in a hallway? Since when does it involve going through her personal belongings and belittling her in front of her peers?" Roberts bristled, her face reddening. "I made a judgment call based on her behavior. She was defiant, uncooperative, and refused to answer my questions. Tamara couldn't hold back any longer." "I wasn't defiant," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was scared. You treated me like I was a criminal, and you wouldn't even listen when I tried to explain." The room fell silent, the weight of Tamara's words hanging in the air. Principal Daniels looked between them, clearly struggling to balance the conflicting accounts. Finally, he cleared his throat, turning to Officer Roberts. "Officer Roberts," he said carefully, "I understand that you felt it necessary to investigate the situation, but it's clear that the manner in which you handled it was less than ideal. Moving forward, I would ask that you exercise greater discretion and sensitivity when dealing with our students. This is a school, not a police station, and we need to ensure that all students feel safe and respected here." Robert's jaw tightened, her face a mask of barely suppressed anger. It was clear that she was not accustomed to being reprimanded, and the humiliation of it only seemed to fuel her resentment. "Understood," she said through gritted teeth, though it was obvious that her compliance was forced. Lauren, however, wasn't satisfied. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the principal. "That's not enough, Principal Daniels. My niece deserves more than a vague assurance that this won't happen again. I want a formal apology, and I want a record of this incident placed in Officer Roberts' personnel file. This kind of behavior has no place in any school, and it's imperative that there are real consequences." Roberts' eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Principal Daniels held up a hand, signaling for silence. He looked at Lauren, then at Tamara, and nodded slowly. "I agree that an apology is warranted," he said, his tone measured. "Officer Roberts, would you be willing to apologize to Tamara for any distress caused by your actions?" Roberts looked as though she had swallowed something bitter, her face twisted with indignation. She hesitated, glancing at Tamara with a look of barely concealed contempt, before finally speaking in a stiff, reluctant tone. "I apologize," she said, each word sounding forced and insincere. "If my actions caused you any distress, I apologize." Tamara could feel the resentment radiating from Roberts, and while the apology was clearly insincere, she took a quiet satisfaction in seeing the officer humbled, if only for a moment. Lauren, however, wasn't willing to let the issue drop so easily. She turned to the principal once more. "And the personnel record?" Principal Daniels hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of formally reprimanding an officer. "I'll need to discuss that with the school board," he said diplomatically. "But I will make sure that this incident is documented and reviewed thoroughly." It wasn't the definitive answer Lauren wanted, but she nodded, her expression firm. "Very well. I'll be following up on this, Principal Daniels. If I don't see meaningful action, I have no problem taking this matter to a higher authority." With that, the meeting came to an end. Tamara and her aunt stood to leave, with Roberts glaring daggers at them as they exited the office. Tamara could feel the officer's resentment burning into her back, but she held her head high, refusing to let Roberts intimidate her any longer. As they walked down the hallway together, Tamara felt a sense of relief mingled with exhaustion. She had faced one of the most humiliating and frightening experiences of her life, but she had come through it with her dignity intact, thanks to her aunt's support. Lauren glanced over at her as they reached the exit, a proud smile softening her expression. "You handled that well, Tamara. I know it wasn't easy." Tamara managed a small smile. "It wasn't. But I think I'm starting to understand what you always say about standing up for yourself." Lauren nodded, her gaze warm. "Good. Because this world isn't always fair, but you can't let people like Roberts take away your power. You're stronger than that." As they stepped outside, Tamara took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She knew that this experience would stay with her, a painful reminder of the prejudice that still existed in the world. But it had also taught her something important about resilience, about standing up for what was right, and about the power of family. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Tamara knew she had the strength to face them, and with her aunt by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The next day at school, Tamara arrived feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and empowerment. The previous day's events weighed heavily on her, yet there was a new determination in her step. Word had spread around campus, and Tamara could feel the eyes of her classmates following her as she walked through the halls. Some looked at her with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with thinly veiled skepticism. She tried to ignore the whispers, keeping her head high as she moved through the familiar hallways. But as she approached her locker, she saw Officer Roberts standing nearby, her posture tense, her eyes cold and narrowed. Tamara's heart skipped a beat, a flicker of fear passing through her. She hadn't expected to see Roberts so soon after the confrontation in the principal's office. Part of her had hoped that the reprimand from the administration and the warning from her aunt would keep Roberts at bay, but it seemed that the officer wasn't ready to let the issue rest. Roberts didn't approach immediately. Instead, she watched Tamara with a look of simmering resentment, as if she were daring her to make a move, to say something that would give her an excuse to lash out. Tamara took a deep breath, steeling herself. She knew that engaging with Roberts now would only lead to more trouble, and she wasn't about to give the officer the satisfaction. Ignoring Roberts as best she could, Tamara opened her locker and began organizing her books. She felt Roberts' gaze boring into her, each second stretching into an eternity as the tension between them thickened. Finally, unable to resist, Roberts took a step closer, her voice low but filled with venom. You may think you've won, little Miss High and Mighty, she hissed, her voice dripping with barely concealed rage. But don't think for a second that you're untouchable. You can hide behind your aunt and her badge, but that won't protect you forever. People like you always slip up sooner or later. Tamara froze, her hand tightening around the strap of her bag. The threat was clear, the hostility in Robert's voice unmistakable. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of defiance rise within her. She had endured too much, felt too humiliated, to back down now. She turned slowly to face Roberts, meeting her gaze head-on. "With all due respect, Officer Roberts," Tamara said, her voice calm but firm, "I'm not the one who slipped up. You're the one who crossed a line. And you know it. My aunt may have protected me this time, but if you keep treating students this way, it won't just be one incident in your file. People are watching now." Robert's face reddened, her jaw clenching as she struggled to keep her composure. She took another step forward, her face inches from Tamara's, her eyes blazing with indignation. "You think you're clever, don't you? You think you can play the victim and make me look like the villain?" Tamara met her glare unflinchingly. "I don't have to make you look like anything, officer. You did that all on your own." Robert's hand twitched as though she were holding herself back from some impulsive action, her face contorted with barely restrained anger. Tamara could see the battle going on within her, the struggle to maintain control in the face of her frustration. But before Roberts could respond, a familiar voice echoed down the hallway. "Officer Roberts," Principal Daniels called, his voice stern as he approached them. His face was unreadable, but there was a steely resolve in his eyes. "My office. Now." Roberts straightened, her expression shifting to one of forced composure. She shot Tamara a final, venomous glare before following the principal, her shoulders stiff with suppressed fury. As they disappeared down the hallway, Tamara exhaled slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected the confrontation to escalate so quickly, but a part of her felt relieved that it had ended without further incident. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and as the final bell rang, Tamara headed to the front of the school, where she knew her aunt would be waiting. She stepped outside, squinting in the bright afternoon sunlight, and spotted Lauren leaning against her car, her expression thoughtful. "Hey, sweetheart," Lauren greeted her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "How was your day?" Tamara shrugged, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't quite articulate. "It was okay, I guess. Roberts tried to intimidate me again, but Principal Daniels stepped in." Lauren's eyes narrowed, her expression darkening. "She confronted you, even after everything that happened yesterday?" Tamara nodded, a spark of frustration flaring up. "She doesn't seem to care about the consequences. She thinks she's untouchable." Lauren placed a comforting hand on Tamara's shoulder, her expression softening. "She's not untouchable, Tamara. People like her thrive on fear and intimidation, but when they're held accountable, they're forced to face the consequences of their actions." As they drove home, Lauren explained that she'd been in contact with the school board, as well as several community organizations dedicated to addressing systemic discrimination. She was prepared to take this issue as far as it needed to go to ensure that Roberts and anyone else who shared her mentality would be held accountable. In the days that followed, Tamara noticed a subtle shift in the school's atmosphere. There were murmurs among the students, whispers of what had happened and speculation about Robert's fate. Some students approached Tamara in private, expressing their support and sharing stories of their own encounters with Robert's heavy-handed authority. For the first time, Tamara realized that she wasn't alone, that her experience was part of a larger pattern, one that many others had also endured in silence. Then, a week later, an announcement came over the school's intercom. Principal Daniels' voice was calm and authoritative as he addressed the students and faculty. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to address an important matter. Effective immediately, Officer Roberts will no longer be part of our school security team. We have decided to part ways after a thorough review of recent incidents, and we are committed to fostering an environment that is respectful, inclusive, and supportive of all students. If you have any concerns, please know that my office is open to you. Thank you. The announcement was brief, but its impact was immediate. A wave of murmurs rippled through the hallways, a mix of surprise, satisfaction, and, in some cases, relief. Tamara felt a sense of closure settle over her. She knew that this victory didn't erase the pain of what she'd endured, but it was a step forward, a small victory against a much larger problem. As she walked through the halls that day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her experience had been painful, but it had also shown her the importance of speaking up, of standing firm in the face of injustice. She knew that there would be more battles ahead, more moments where she'd have to assert her worth and demand respect. But now, she had the confidence to face them head-on. That afternoon, Tamara met with her aunt at a nearby cafe to celebrate. They sat by the window sipping coffee and reflecting on everything that had happened. You did good, Tamara, Lauren said, her voice filled with pride. Not everyone has the courage to stand up to people like Roberts. You made a difference. Tamara looked down at her cup, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. I couldn't have done it without you. I don't know if I would have been brave enough to face her if you hadn't been there to back me up. Lauren reached across the table, placing her hand over Tamara's. You have that bravery inside you, Tamara. I just reminded you of what you're capable of. And remember, this isn't just about one officer. It's about creating change one step at a time. Tamara nodded, feeling the weight of her aunt's words settle over her. She knew that the fight for justice and respect was far from over, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her voice, and she was ready to use it. As they left the cafe, Tamara felt a new sense of determination solidify within her. She was more than just a student, more than someone who could be easily intimidated or silenced. She was part of a legacy of resilience and strength, a legacy that her aunt had passed down to her. And now she was ready to carry that legacy forward, facing whatever challenges the world threw her way with unbreakable resolve. The days following Officer Roberts' dismissal brought a profound sense of calm to the school. The tension that had shadowed the halls seemed to dissipate, and Tamara felt a newfound ease as she moved through her classes, unburdened by the heavy, watchful gaze that Roberts had cast over her. She noticed the subtle shifts in her classmates' attitudes as well. Some were more openly friendly, offering her smiles or nods of encouragement, while others seemed quietly respectful, as if recognizing the courage it had taken for her to stand up to someone in power. One afternoon, a week after Roberts had left, Principal Daniels called Tamara to his office. When she arrived, she found him sitting behind his desk, a thoughtful expression on his face as he looked up to greet her. Tamara, he began, gesturing for her to sit. I wanted to thank you personally. I realized that the past few weeks have been incredibly difficult, but you handled yourself with dignity and strength. Not only did you stand up for yourself, but you also inspired others to reflect on how we can create a safer, more inclusive environment at this school. Tamara felt a flush of pride, though she kept her expression modest. Thank you, Principal Daniels. I just didn't want anyone else to feel the way I did. No one should be made to feel like they're less than anyone else. He nodded, a gentle smile touching his face. You're absolutely right, and I'm committed to ensuring that. In light of everything that's happened, The school board has decided to implement new training programs for staff, with an emphasis on recognizing and confronting implicit bias. Your courage has made a real difference, Tamara. The weight of his words settled over her, filling her with a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't just a personal victory anymore, it was a step toward real change, the kind of change that her aunt had always encouraged her to fight for. Later that day, Tamara found herself in her aunt's living room, where Lauren had invited her for dinner. The two of them sat together, sharing stories and laughter. But as the evening drew to a close, Lauren turned to Tamara, her expression serious yet proud. "You know, Tamara," she said softly, "what you did wasn't just about standing up to one person. You set an example for everyone around you. You showed them what it means to hold people accountable, to demand respect even when it isn't freely given." Tamara looked down, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "I learned that from you, Aunt Lauren. Watching you, seeing how you carry yourself, you taught me what it means to be strong." Lauren reached out, placing a hand over Tamara's. "I'm proud of you, Tamara. This world isn't always fair, but people like you are the reason it can get better. You keep using your voice, keep standing up for what's right. Don't let anyone ever take that from you." They sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of Lauren's words filling the room like a comforting embrace. Tamara knew that this experience had changed her. She had seen the face of prejudice, felt its sting, but she had also found her own strength, her own resolve. And she knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. As she left her aunt's house that night, Tamara felt a newfound determination solidify within her. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for those who might not yet have found their voice, for those who needed someone to stand with them. And with her aunt by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The world wasn't perfect, and the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. But for the first time, Tamara felt truly prepared to walk it, with her head held high and her heart unafraid.